Faith is the victory we know that overcomes the world.
Good evening. I'm glad y'all could join us back here to worship God, to praise His name, and to hear from His Word. Today we are picking up in our series on Matthew, preaching through Matthew, specifically in Matthew chapter 4. And our text tonight is beginning in verse 23. And Jesus went about in all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all manner of disease and all manner of sickness among the people. And the report of him went forth into all Syria, and they brought unto him all that were sick, holden with diverse diseases and torments, possessed with demons and epileptic and palsied, and he healed them. And there followed him great multitudes from Galilee and Decapolis and Jerusalem and Judea and from beyond the Jordan. Now, it might not seem like there's an awful lot there in that text, but I, as you can probably tell from the title of the sermon, honed in on that idea, and the report of him went forth. Because every one of us is leaving behind a report. We're all leaving behind a reputation or a legacy. Long after our words are forgotten, our deeds and our character remain in the memory of others. The wise man said in Proverbs 22 and verse 1, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than gold and silver. Because wealth fades and possessions perish and accomplishments pass away, but your name, your reputation endures. So think for a moment of some people that you have known. When a name is spoken, what comes to your mind? I'm sure there are plenty of people who, when their name is spoken, you think of kindness. You think, wow, that's a trustworthy person. Wow, I love that person. They're amazing. And I'm sure there are other names when their name is spoken where you think, that person wasn't honest. That person hurt me. That person doesn't care or love. Each one of us is writing a story with the way that we live, and others are reading that story. And the question is, what do they see? What will they remember about our stories? History is full of names that carry a report with them, both good and bad. Some are remembered for their sacrifices and others for their corruption. Some left legacies of faith and others legacies of destruction. But in the end, each report is not simply what people thought, it is what was truly revealed by their lives. We can't stop people from forming an impression of us, but we can determine the kind of impression that it will be. The report of Jesus is still being spoken today. And as we study his life, the question is not only how is he known, but how do we want to be known? Because this is the report of Jesus. This is the impression, the reputation that he left behind. What reputation are we leaving behind? So first of all, Jesus' reputation. There we go. His works were known. His works confirmed his identity. A person's identity is revealed not in just what they claim, but in what they do. I mean, anybody can claim to be anything. McKaylee and I are watching a show currently where someone claimed to be a lawyer, but he didn't actually go to school for that, and recently he got arrested in the show for that. Anybody can claim to be something that they want to be, anything they want to be, but that's not what you are. Jesus was not the first to claim to be a teacher. He wasn't the first to claim to be a prophet. He wasn't even the first to claim to be the Messiah. Many had done that before him. But unlike all of those others, his works confirmed his identity. He would say in John 10 and verse 25, the works that I do in my Father's name, these bear witness of me. His works were the same ones that were foretold of the Messiah. Isaiah prophesied in Isaiah 35, beginning in verse 5, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing, for in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. The Messiah was the same one who would do these works. It was the same one who would proclaim liberty to the captives and would bind up the brokenhearted, according to Isaiah 61:1. When John the Immerser, the one who had baptized Christ, when he saw Jesus coming, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." And yet he still doubted at one point. And when he doubted, he sent his disciples to confirm with Jesus. And Jesus' reply in Matthew 11:4, beginning in verse 4, was, "Go and tell John the things which ye hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good tidings preached unto him." These were the works that testified of his identity. These works weren't accidents, they were the fulfillment of prophecy, and they confirmed his identity as the promised one. His works confirmed his relationship with the Father as well, though. Not only did he say that those works bear witness of him, but John 5:36, it shows that the Father sent him as well. And Nicodemus would understand this, he would acknowledge this when he said in John 3 and verse 2, "No man can do the signs that thou doest, except God be with him." Christ would open himself up for critique by saying that people should only believe him if he does the works of the Father, in John 10:37-38, and so he did them. He said, if I am from God the Father, then the works that I do are of the Father. If I'm not doing the works of the Father, then I'm not from the Father. His works, though, left no doubt in anyone's mind that he was on a divine mission, that he was sent from God. He was not a self-appointed prophet, he was the one sent by God. And his works confirmed his authority as a teacher as well. Anyone can claim to be a teacher, but if you don't have anything to offer, or if you have no authority to preach or to teach, then people can just ignore you, right? They can just overlook you. And even if you have authority, some people are going to ignore you, but others will listen. But Christ's works proved that the authority that he had. His works showed everyone that he had something to offer. In John 8:32, he said, "Ye shall know the truth." Because the truth was exactly what he was teaching. He had his works, his deeds, backing up the truth that he was teaching. When he healed the paralytic, he said in Mark 2:10-11, that ye may know that the Son of Man hath authority on earth to forgive sins. Now, everything that Christ did, all of the works that he accomplished, were a means of confirming the authority behind his message. Unlike the scribes and the Pharisees and all these other Jewish teachers, his teachings were not empty words. He lived out his teachings. They were backed by action and authority. His identity as teacher and as master and Lord was confirmed by his works. His works also confirmed him as the Son of God. People weren't all expecting the Messiah to literally be the Son of God, but his works confirmed that very thing. John wrote in John 20:30-31, he confirmed the purpose of these miracles. He said, "Many other signs therefore did Jesus in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that ye may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye may have life in his name." Now, his works showed without a doubt that he was certainly the Son of God. And the resurrection was that crowning work that confirmed his sonship. Romans 1 and verse 4. Even at the cross, right, the centurion, people who had a hand in placing him on that cross, said in Matthew 27:54, "Truly this was the Son of God." And he said that because of what he saw when Christ was on that cross. Jesus' words weren't tricks. They weren't illusions. I think of the magicians, right, when Moses went before Pharaoh in Exodus. And the first several of the miracles that he worked, the magicians would copy him. But we all know that they weren't actually working miracles. They were just illusions. They were just tricks. People do things that we can't always explain, but there's a reason behind them. There's a method behind them. But when God was working, his works weren't tricks. They weren't illusions. They were his divine testimony. And his works were consistent with his teaching. Many people speak, but don't live the life of the words that they are speaking. But Jesus was most certainly never guilty of hypocrisy. His works and his words matched perfectly. In fact, he condemned that very thing of hypocrisy when teaching of the Pharisees in Matthew 23:3, when he said, "They say and do not." This consistency, though, is one of the many reasons why Christ's report spread. Almost nothing hurts your reputation more than teaching one thing and then doing another. When you claim something but go back and don't do the things that you claim, people stop trusting you. But Christ was consistent. His teaching was backed by his examples. In John 8:29, Jesus taught righteousness, but he lived it just the same. He taught humility, and he practiced it in everything that he did, Matthew 20:28. Use prayer for an example, right? Christ taught prayer. He exemplified, or he showed the disciples how to pray in Matthew 6:9-13. But note, as you look throughout his ministry, such as Mark 1:35, he rose early in the morning and prayed often. When he needed God, when he wanted guidance and aid, he went and prayed all night. John 6:12. Our teaching can never be empty theory. Our lives must show what we preach. 1 Timothy 4:12. Christ taught others to love his enemies in Matthew 5:44. But he didn't leave it at that. He didn't say, love your enemies, and then he went behind the people's back and attacked his enemies. On the cross, when he was suspended in pain, when he was suffering, he mustered the strength to say in Luke 23:34, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How many of us can honestly say that if it wasn't for wanting to be like Christ, we would say the same thing, right? It would be no easy task, certainly, even as Christians. It's hard to love your enemies, but what he taught, he lived. He taught, in Luke 19:10, that the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. And he lived that out in his life. He dined with sinners where the Jewish leaders didn't want to go, Matthew 9:10-12. He went through Samaria, whereas most Jews would have gone around. And then he sat at the well and spoke with the Samaritan woman, one who the Jews looked down upon and despised, in John 4. He forgave the sinful woman, despite the fact that everyone else wanted to condemn her, Luke 7:48-50. Christ said that he was there to seek and save the lost, and he demonstrated that in his life. He didn't just say it and not live it out. He told others to bear their cross, right? To take up their cross daily and to follow him. And he didn't refrain from bearing his own cross, Luke 14:27 and John 19:17. But he bore his cross for our sakes. Christianity is not just a doctrine to proclaim. It's not just something to preach. It's not just something to teach. It is something to live. It is a walk that we must walk, that we must practice, James 1:22. Our faith needs to be lived daily, or else it is a dead faith. Christ's teachings had integrity because his works matched his words. He wasn't a hypocrite. They appeared righteous, but they were corrupt inside, Matthew 23:27-28. Whereas Christ was tempted in all points as we are, and yet was without sin, Hebrews 4:15. Even his enemies, even if dishonest, had to acknowledge his integrity, which was evidenced They said in Mark 12 and verse 14, "Teacher, we know that thou art true, and carest not for anyone, for thou regardest not the person of men, but of a truth teachest the way of God." These are the same people who would see him raise a man from the dead and said, people are going to believe him if we don't do something. They understood that he was the Messiah, that he was the Son of God, that he was here to save the lost. His actions left no doubt that he lived what he taught. They just didn't want to believe it. Peter talked about the example that Christ left for us in 1 Peter 2:21 and 22. He said, "Who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, because his life and his works agreed with his teaching." Because of that, he taught with authority, Matthew 7:28 through 29. Because that hypocrisy destroys influence, but integrity confirms teaching. If we claim Christ, then our works need to harmonize with our words, Romans 2:21 through 24. But Christ, his works drew others to him. And towards the end here in verse 25, it says, "And there followed him great multitudes from Galilee and Decapolis and Jerusalem and Judea and from beyond the Jordan." Christ's words and his works created a powerful draw. People were compelled to come near him, to hear him. His works drew those multitudes, you'll notice, not just from the area where he was, right? He was in Galilee, but it drew people from all over. The Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, beyond Jordan. His influence reached the Jews and the Gentiles alike. Even outsiders could not resist the pull of his deeds. Jesus' life broke barriers. His works drew the rich and the poor, drew Jew and Gentile, men and women. But do our works show Christ in such a way that they draw all kinds of people? Multitudes came first because of what he did, but they stayed to hear what he said. They followed him because they beheld the signs which he did, according to John 6 and verse 2. And yet he fed them not only bread for the body, he fed them bread for the soul. John 6:26 through 27 and 35. After the multitudes gathered, as we'll look at next week when we start in Matthew 5, he sat down and taught the Sermon on the Mount. Our good works need to open the door for the gospel, Matthew 5:16. And people might first notice our works. They might first notice the kind of actions that we take before they listen to what we have to say. But we need to use that as a door for the gospel. Rob Whitaker often says, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's our actions first that will leave an impression on people. Jesus' works, though, drew opposition. But even the opposition that it drew testified of him. Because not everyone came to him with pure motives, like those who had said, "We know that you teach us what is true," right? And yet then they were going to try to catch him in a trap right after that. Mark records them watching in Mark 3 and verse 2 to see if he would heal on the Sabbath so that they could catch him, so that they could attack him and accuse him. The chief priests, in a panic, as I mentioned a second ago in John 11:47 through 48, after raising Lazarus from the dead, admitted to the fact that people were going to believe him. Even the officers who were sent to arrest him in John 7 verse 46 said, "Never man so spake." If we live faithfully, if we live with integrity, walking with Christ, then even those who are enemies of us are forced to reckon with Christ in us. Sometimes opposition is just proof that we are living rightly. But Christ's power was also seen. His power over sickness was seen. It says, "And they brought unto him all that were sick, holden with diverse diseases and torments, epileptic and palsied, and he healed them." One of the clearest demonstrations of the Lord's power was his power over sickness. Because unlike the physicians of the time who could only treat some of these diseases, unlike the many religions of the time that could only offer some kind of symbolic purity, Jesus showed complete dominion over physical disease. Every disease and infirmity covers quite a broad range. We see him heal lepers, the outcasts with society, the ones who were afflicted with the most dreaded of diseases. It was seen as incurable, but he was able to heal it instantaneously, Matthew 8:23. He was able to heal the blind, those who couldn't see, those who had never been able to see from birth, John 9:1-7. Peter's mother-in-law was healed of a fever in Mark 1:30-31. The paralytic walked at the command of Christ in Matthew 9:2-7. He even cured chronic illnesses, such as the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years that was healed in an instant in Mark 5:25-29. From minor to major, from recent to lifelong, Jesus had power over all of the sicknesses. And his power was seen especially in the ease of healing, because his healings were not prescriptions, they weren't surgeries, it wasn't a process. His healing was instantaneous. It was spoken with words or touches. When the centurion came for him for healing in Matthew 8:8-13, Christ didn't even go see the servant that he wanted to heal. He just spoke, and the servant was healed from a distance. Remember those lepers that we talked about, right? No, they were shunned from society because of how contagious it was. They lived outside of cities. They weren't allowed to be around people at all. No one would be caught dead touching a leper. But when Christ touched them, Matthew 8:3, they were healed. There were never limits on Christ's healing. There were never delays. There was no failure. His healing, though, as great as it is, points to something greater, to one ultimate cure. Every physical healing pointed to eternal restoration. When Lazarus was raised from the dead in John 11:25, Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life." Revelation 21:4 says, that tells us that in heaven there's not going to be any death. There's not going to be any sorrow or crying or any more pain. These earthly healings were wonderful, but they were temporary. The people who were healed might have got sick again, would most certainly die. But they anticipated the day of eternal healing. The greatest sickness that has ever afflicted our world is sin, Matthew 9:12-13. And Christ alone is the physician who provides the permanent cure. But he showed power also not just over sickness, but over human limitations. Because humanity is defined by limitations. We have physical weaknesses. We have mental frailty. Ultimately, we are mortal. We have finite lives that are going to end. No matter how advanced medicine becomes, there are boundaries that we cannot cross. Sometimes you might see like movies or TV shows. How many stories have been written over the idea of trying to overcome death, right? But he did what was impossible for man. He had power over incurable conditions like epilepsy and paralysis, conditions that were hopeless for the physicians of the time. Once again, that woman with the issue of blood, yet she was healed instantly by Jesus. She said that she had gone to see physician after physician. None of them could do anything. The man at the pool of Bethesda had been infirm for 38 years, in John 5:5-9, and yet he arose and walked when Jesus spoke. The blind and the mute man was healed instantly in Matthew 12:22. And those were all conditions that were impossible for man to cure, but easy for Christ. If we want to multiply our bread, what do we have to do? We have to go plant seed, and then we have to take care for it and watch it as it grows, and then we have to harvest it, and then we have to grind it, and then we have to add a few more ingredients that we also had to work to collect, and then suddenly we have bread, right? But when Jesus wanted to multiply bread, he just kept pulling it apart until he had enough to feed 5,000 people with plenty of leftovers in John 6, 5 through 13. Water could never become a wine, but Christ transformed it like it was nothing in John 2, 1 through 11. Men can't walk on water, but Christ did. And he even made it so that Peter also could walk on water in Matthew 14, 25. Have you ever seen the devastation of hurricanes and tornadoes or tsunamis or earthquakes, all of these natural disasters that plague our earth? If humans had some kind of power over those natural disasters, wouldn't that be wonderful? But when faced with a storm that could have destroyed his ship and killed the people within, Christ's answer was to speak to it, to rebuke the wind and the sea, and it listened. Nature, Luke 8:24 through 25, obeyed him. Christ's power is far beyond the limitations of man, especially and finally in overcoming death. Remember how I mentioned earlier all those movies and books and stuff that are written on attempting to overcome death? The oldest literature that we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is a story about a man trying to become immortal after he sees his friend die. From the beginning, people have been attempting to overcome death. Death is the self-proclaimed greatest limitation of man. But Christ casually raised the widow at Nain's son in Luke 7:12 through 15. He wasn't even going there for that reason. It says that it was a funeral procession that was leaving the city as he was passing by. And he just casually brought her son back to life. He raised Jairus' daughter in Mark 5:35 through 42. He raised Lazarus in John 11:43 through 44 after he had been dead for 4 days. Christ told his followers and his enemies that he had the power to lay down his life and also to take it back up again. And his empty tomb proved that very point. John 10:18 and Matthew 28:6. The fact that there was no body within that stone vault illustrated Christ's greatest triumph over human limitations. But it doesn't just stop at that. It also says that they brought people who were possessed with demons. Christ illustrated his power over the spiritual realm as well. The Bible paints a portrait of our world with a loving God who is working in our world to bring us salvation. But it also reveals to us some more about that unseen world. It is a world where good and evil are all at work. In Jesus' ministry, this unseen world became visible, though. The demon possession was rampant at the time. Satan was active, and spiritual oppression was evident. But unlike any other, Jesus showed absolute power over the spiritual realm. Matthew 28:18, he has all authority in heaven and on earth. He demonstrated his power with Satan after his baptism. It was Satan tempting him in the wilderness, and yet he was victorious in that matter over Satan's schemes. And because he overcame, we too can overcome. 1 Corinthians 10:13. The same word that he used is still available to us today. Ephesians 6 and verse 17. Christ demonstrated his power over those demons and unclean spirits. In the synagogue at Capernaum, Jesus cast out a demon with a word in Mark 1:23 through 27. The people said, "With authority he commandeth even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." The legions of demons at Gerasene and the Gerasene man begged Jesus not to torment them, not to send them back to the abyss in Mark 5:1 through 15. Christ's power terrified the forces of darkness. His power over the demons was presented by himself as evidence for the fact that the kingdom of God was present. Luke 11 verse 20. Now, evil is still real. Demons no longer possess men, as in the first century, because we no longer have miracles today. But still, we are fighting a spiritual battle, according to Ephesians 6 and verse 12. And in that spiritual battle, Christ is still our deliverer. Christ's ministry was an incursion into the territory of Satan. And he came for the very purpose of destroying the works of the devil. 1 John 3 and verse 8. On the cross, having despoiled the principalities and the powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Colossians 2 and verse 15. Through death, he destroyed him that had the power of death, that is, the devil. Hebrews 2 and verse 14. His coming meant that, John 12:31, now shall the prince of this world be cast out. Christ's power is offensive, it's not defensive. He's already won the battle. His power was also seen, though, in the reaction of the people. The power of Christ could not be ignored. People might have resisted his teaching, they might have rejected his claims, but his power was undeniable. His power produced wonder and fear and faith in the people who saw. Some were amazed by it and glorified God. After the healing of the paralytic in Mark 2 and verse 12, they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw it on this fashion." After another healing in Matthew 9 and verse 8, the multitudes saw it, and when the multitudes saw it, they were afraid and glorified God who had given such authority unto men. When he raised the widow's son, in Luke 7 and verse 16, fear took hold on all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet is arisen among us." The natural reaction of the honest heart was reverence and praise. And some were drawn to follow him. John wrote in John 6 and verse 2, "A great multitude followed him because they beheld the signs which he did on them that were sick. Many came because they heard he had raised Lazarus," in John 12:17 through 18. The power of Christ compelled men and women to leave their homes and seek them, but not all became true disciples. Some were offended, some opposed him. The Pharisees in Matthew 12, in verse 24, accused him of casting out demons in the name of Beelzebub, in the name of the devil himself. Now, they knew that didn't make any sense. And Jesus would call them out on that. He would say, "Why would the devil send me to take out his own men? That doesn't make any sense." But they said it anyways because they were offended by his power. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, again, John 11:47 through 48, they said, "If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him." And so instead of believing, they chose to gather to hash a plan because they could not stand that he was God's servant. The Jews persecuted him because he healed on the Sabbath in John 5 and verse 16. Jesus' power was undeniable, but the hardened heart refused to submit and opposed him instead. But Christ's mercy was also shown. His mercy was seen in his willingness to receive the needy. His works were not just cold displays of his ability. He wasn't just showing off the fact that he could do these things. Every work, every action that he took was an expression of his heart. Behind every healing, behind every deliverance, behind every restoration stood mercy and compassion. The greatness of Christ was not only in his power, it was in his mercy. Because he didn't refuse those who came to him. When they brought their sick, he healed them without exception. There were no restrictions, there were no refusals. That was the Spirit of Christ in everything that he did. John 6 and verse 37. Apparently I didn't put, well, I guess that makes it easier for you guys because they're not coming one at a time. In John 6 and verse 37, he said, "Him that cometh to me, I will in no wise cast out." At evening, in Mark 1:32 through 34, the whole city gathered and he received them. In Mark 10:46 through 52, Bartimaeus cried out, though others tried to silence him. And Christ, instead of rebuking him, stopped, listened, and then healed him. Jesus had time for the needy when others would have brushed them aside. He welcomed those who others rejected. He ate with tax collectors and sinners, Luke 5:29 through 32. The Pharisees would scoff at him in Luke 7:37 through 39, but he would say, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. The sinful woman wept at his feet, while Simon the Pharisee scorned, but Jesus received her. In Luke 15 and verse 1 through 2, it says, Now all the publicans and sinners were drawing near unto him to hear him. And both the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners, and eateth with them. And Jesus never turned them away. When the disciples rebuked parents for bringing children to Christ, he corrected them and said, Suffer the little children to come to me, in Matthew 19:13 through 14. He invited the burdened to come to him. His mercy was proactive. And he didn't just wait for people to come to him. He invited them to come to him. He said, Come unto me, in Matthew 11:28 through 30, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. On the last day of one of the feasts, he said in John 7:37, If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. Christ's mercy wasn't reluctant. It wasn't just done out of duty or obligation. It was eager. He receives and invites the weary, the thirsty, and the sinner. Remember, I quoted Brother Whitaker a second ago. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Why do you think so many of those publicans and sinners followed Christ? Because he was willing to sit and eat with them when no one else would. He showed that he cared about them. And because he showed he cared, that they listened to what he taught. His mercy was also seen in his compassion for human suffering. Mercy is not just a decision to help. It is a heart that's moved by another's suffering. In Matthew 9:36, when Christ saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion. Again, in Matthew 14:14, it says that he had compassion on the multitudes. When the leper begged Christ for healing, it says he, in Luke 7:12 through 15, being moved with compassion, healed him. Jesus felt their pain. He understood their grief, and he relieved it. He took action to ease the pain that he knew they were suffering. Compassion is more than just pity. It's action. He said in Matthew 15:32, I have compassion on the multitude because they continue with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. Now, he didn't just say, man, I feel bad for them. They don't have anything to eat. Well, that stinks. I guess I'm just going to eat my food over here. No, he fed the 4,000. And the same thing happened with the 5,000 in Mark 6:34 through 44. He multiplied the food for them because he was moved with compassion toward them because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. Christ cared about their bodily needs as well as their spiritual needs. His compassion, though, was primarily moved by the lost condition of men. He saw the multitudes. He saw that they were shepherdless. That was what moved him with compassion. His compassion is what caused him to teach because they lacked guidance. Mark 6:34. Compassion for suffering included compassion for their confusion, for their lostness, for their brokenness. Jesus' heart broke not only for the sick, it broke for the souls that wandered without direction. When we see wandering souls without direction, what do we think? A good name outlives riches. Christ's report filled the whole world. It continues to fill the whole world. His works were seen. His power was seen, and his mercy was shown. But now the question rests with us. What report will our lives send out? We need to let Christ be the measure of our name. Not the praise of a friend, not the rumor mill, not the moment's applause, but the Lord's approval. When the gospel is our standard, our name is anchored. It's not drifting out there. We need to let our light define our legacy. Reputations are built in ordinary hours. They're built at home, they're built at work, online, among the brethren. So when we are doing anything, we need to ask ourselves the question, what actions can we take? What deed can we do that makes Christ visible in us? When we need to set our hearts on the final accounting. Because one day our report is going to be read before God. So we need to live now for that day. We need to do the will of the Father today. We need to keep a conscience that is void of offense. We need to abstain from every form of evil. The Lord weighs in what is true. He's not going to listen to the rumors that people tell about you or the lies that people try to spin about you. He's going to listen to what is true. The report of Jesus still stands today, but what will our report say in the future? And perhaps your report doesn't say what it needs to say tonight. Perhaps there is something that needs to be corrected in your life so that you can better have a report. If you have any need, we're here to love you and to encourage you and to help you on that journey. If there is anything you need us to pray for or to encourage you with, we would ask that you come as we stand and as we sing.